Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. Our guest today is Terence Smith, an award-winning journalist, political reporter, foreign correspondent, editor, and television analyst over the course of a 5-decade-long career. He spent 20 years of that with the New York Times, but also worked with CBS News, the NewsHour, and was the guest host for the Diane Rehm Show. He also wrote a column for the Capital Gazette out of Maryland. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. My name is Neil Parekh, and I am the executive producer and sometimes guest host of Sri's show. And it is my honor and privilege to guest host today's show with you. We have an incredible guest today, but we also have an incredible newspaper. So much to cover, including a very special report on the front page about the January 6th insurrection, which we will spend some time on. It's a great piece by Dan Barry and several other colleagues looking at several specific individuals and their role in the insurrection. I want to call it to your attention at the top of the show, even before we get to the newspaper, in case anyone is doubting what happened on that day. We're going to spend some good time on that section. But let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks who are watching. Our friend Diane Stefani is watching from Margate, New Jersey. Sunny Slaughter joining us from Maryland, not far from where I live in Springfield, Virginia. Sunny, of course, was our guest when we did a special show on the 1619 Project, and then she appeared several other times on this show and Sri's show, Sri's COVID show as well. Sunny, thank you as always for your support. Patricia Freudenberg is joining us from New York. Patricia, always great to see you. Patricia is watching on LinkedIn. Again, we're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and our Digimentors website. If you're watching on our Digimentors website, feel free to click on any of the links if you want to get social. Most of the engagement happens on Facebook. We get more of our views on Twitter. Again, Patricia, thank you for joining us. Miriam is joining us from Hell's Kitchen in New York City. Doug Levy, one of our early morning risers, is joining us from California. Thank you, Doug. Hi, Mom. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you. Always appreciate you joining. And I promised that I would behave in today's show. Not really. That's for you, Mom. You didn't think I would do it on the air, but I did. Ralph Lewenthal is joining us. Ralph is a former guest of on the show. Greetings from the East Side. Thank you, Ralph. Great to see you today. And then we also have our producers watching. Paula Kiger already put in a link to the 90 Seconds of Rage article that was referenced earlier. That's on the front page. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. We have Julia Weeks watching as well. And she's watching on Terry's Facebook page. Thank you again to everyone watching on Terry's page. Really appreciate it. And then Carla Baranakis is watching as well from Weehawken, New Jersey. Everything is legal in New Jersey. I mentioned our team. Let me show you our full picture. Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. You can follow them at Big Green Pen, at Steve DeReeve, at Julia L. Weeks, and at Kabara. That's one of the things that's special about our show, that we have people helping annotate the show, put in links, engaging with the audience, as opposed to just putting up a webcam and pointing to a discussion. It's more interactive than that. And we do this as part of Digimentors, a virtual and hybrid events, social and digital media consulting firm. I'm the vice president of events and communications for Digimentors. It's a firm that Sri started several years ago. And of course, things picked up at the very beginning of the pandemic. So it is my pleasure, after working with United Way for about 9 years. I joined Digimentors full time last year in August. If you're interested in having us produce an online show for you, please feel free to contact us. My email address is neil@digimentors.group, or you can reach Sri@digimentors.group. We'll be happy to talk with you about your event and see what the best way is. What's the best tool? We use StreamYard for most of our productions, but that may not be the best tool for you. So we will definitely sit down and talk to you about it. And we look forward to helping you connect with your audience. Again, for folks who are joining, my name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. It is always an honor and a privilege. I remember the first time that Sri asked me to guest host for him. He gave me his Facebook password. I mean, can you believe that? Sri, who is incredible on social media and is so active, trusted me with his password and said, Neil, I want the show to go on this Sunday. I can't go. This was like 2.5 years ago. Here's my password. Go live and just remind people that you're not me and that you're guest hosting. Well, one of the things that we like about StreamYard is that it's so much easier to explain who's talking. I can put up a banner and let you know my full information and my title. So that's one of the things that we certainly like about this platform. Let's see who else has joined us, and then we'll dig into the show. Let's see, we have Jess Esch joining from Portland, Maine. Jess is a former colleague at United Way. She worked at what was United Way of Greater Portland at the time. I believe it might be United Way Southern Maine now. But Jess, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And my mom gave me a thumbs up, I guess, on my giving her the waving my tongue at her and stuff. Thanks, Mom. Wasn't sure you'd call it funny, but thank you. Ted Coltman is joining us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Sujinda Chandrasekhar is joining us. Dr. Chandrasekhar is the co-host of She's on Call, which is with Dr. Marina Kurian, a great medical show that airs every other week on at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Catch the show next week. This is the off week for them, but they'll be back next week with a great show. And Naomi Service is joining us from the Upper West Side. Naomi, thank you. And Dr. Chandrasekhar says that her ear surgery society loves Digimentors. They do. The American Neurotology Society, we've produced several events for them. Thank you so much, Dr. Chandrasekhar, for the referrals and for putting us in touch with them. Patricia Freudenberg giving a shout out to our team. Thank you, Patricia. And Sherry joining us from Beverly Hills. Thank you, Sherry. And yes, it was United Way of Southern Maine is what they changed their name to. They expanded their territory. Liz Pressman joining us from Western Massachusetts. So Liz, thank you. As a reminder for folks, our guest today is Terry Smith. Terry Smith is, as I mentioned, an award-winning journalist, political reporter, foreign correspondent, editor, and television analyst over the course of a 5-decade career. And as I mentioned, he worked with the New York Times, CBS News, the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, was the guest host for the Diane Rehm Show. He's also the author of a newly published memoir that just came out just a few days ago, 4 Presidents, 5 Wars. And we'll get to that when we bring him on the screen. But first, what I want to do is to give you a quick sense of what's in the paper. And then after we do that, we'll bring Terry on to join us. We're using a new camera this week that you may have seen Sri use last week. Sorry for the echo real quick. It's called Pencil Cam, and we like it a lot. It gives you a nice overhead, a clean view of the paper, as opposed to having to juggle a cell phone, etc. So let's take a look at what the paper has in store. This is the front page. This is that 90 seconds of rage that I mentioned earlier, dominating the front page, even though the lead is the top right article, Flood of Money and Fight to Take Congress's Reins. But you can't avoid this incredible piece, and it's great both online and in print. Below the Fold, three strangers with a mission, rescuing a burned Afghan girl, taking the Godfather out of the picture in Sicily. They're literally trying to get people to not name godparents because of it strengthens ties within the mafia. An interesting approach. And then for Instagram, Dread at Loss of Teen Time is another in a series of articles about Facebook and Instagram. We have the arts and leisure section, growing more sure of herself every day. Issa Rae discusses the final season of Insecure, the HBO show she helped create. And that's what the full page looks like in terms of the image. Sorry for knocking the camera there. We have the Sunday Review, The Negotiators, two rising politicians, both former left-wing activists, are about to determine the fate of the Biden agenda. Kirsten Sinema and Pramila Jayapal. And a shout out to Pramila Jayapal. She represents a district in Seattle. I lived in Seattle for 15 years. And I was there when she founded a group called Hate Free Zone the day after 9/11 at the Seattle Center. We'll not forget those days anytime soon. Sunday Business. This cover story, you see the picture on the top half, running down a green dream. This mining tycoon, Andrew Forrest, wants to lead a climate change revolution. So that's an interesting change of approach in terms of focus. Sunday Styles. We'll have to open this up. The Sneaker Bot Wars. So you can't quite see the full page, but we'll show the full page here. Just raise it up. There's the Sneaker Bot Wars for you there. So we'll take a look at that. And then we have the book review, and I'm so excited. This week's book review is a standard issue, but next week they're going to be celebrating their 125th anniversary, and Tina Jordan, the deputy editor of the book review, will be joining us. How incredible is that? We have the magazine. The cover story is The Passion of Questlove. So we'll check that out. You're getting a little glare, but there you go. And there's also the New York Times Style magazine, celebrating the people who make and change the culture. Juliette Binoche, Glenn Ligon, Lynn Notage, and Anna Sui. So interesting collection of folks. So we'll put the paper back together. It's not your usual look at the paper in terms of all spread out, but with this camera, we will go with the overhead. But with that review, we will come back and introduce our guest, Terry Smith. And I am so thrilled to have Terry join us. Terry?
Good morning, Neil.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today.
It's a pleasure to join you. I must make a small correction.
Already.
On the title of this is the shameless promotion section. On the title of the book, you said 4 presidents. It's 4 wars, 5 presidents.
The other way.
Let me just finish. A reporter's journey from Jerusalem to Saigon to the White House. So
absolutely.
That's the title. And there it is. So
absolutely.
You have it there.
My apologies, Terry. My apologies.
Yeah.
These are some of the quotes from Dan Rather, Joe Lelyveld, Leslie Stahl, Judy Woodruff. Just some incredible endorsements. We'll take a closer look at those later. But I want to jump in and ask you, Terry, the first question that we ask all our guests when they come on. It's been about a year and a half under the pandemic. What has the last year and a half been like for you? How have things gone? We hope everyone has stayed healthy, and you've obviously made the most of your time. You published a book, but talk to us about the last year and a half.
Well, it's certainly been different. That's for sure. And in 2020, I had 5 scheduled international speaking gigs on Crystal Cruises, and 2, maybe 3 actually, New York Times journeys scheduled. They were in Berlin and Washington. They were all canceled. And so I had no further excuse to put off finishing the memoir that I had picked up and put down over the years. Excuse me. So I did, and got an agent, got a publisher, and it has, the official pub date was Friday, October 15th, just a couple days ago. And it's an account of, it's a memoir, a journalistic memoir. We all know the world is waiting for this, of course, but maybe the world doesn't know it. And I hope to find an audience for an account of what was 20 years with the New York Times, and then 13 years with CBS News, 9 of them doing the cover stories for CBS Sunday Morning, and then 8 years with the what was then the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer on PBS, is now, of course, known simply as the PBS NewsHour. And I'll be talking with Judy Woodruff this week about the book. And she did a wonderful blurb on the thing. I really appreciated the blurb from Joe Lewenthal. I think Johnny Scott had a hand in it as well, because I've known Joe since he and I first joined the paper long before most of you were born in 1965. And we've been friends ever since. So I greatly appreciated that.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at those blurbs a little more closely. Dan Rather said, "What a life Terence Smith has lived. This is an adventure story of a reporter's career, well lived, well told, big-hearted, and chock full of great stories." Joe Lewenthal, as you were just mentioning, 5 Presidents is a remarkable recounting of Terry's 50 adventurous years in print and television reporting and editing, a rumination on the transformation of news gathering and the world. Leslie Stahl, and this is an excerpt from her review, an intimate, sweeping, engrossing memoir of a New York Times reporter covering the world during the romantic era of foreign correspondence. Judy Woodruff, Terry Smith's candid personal story of one reporter's life of adventure intersects with some of the biggest news events of the past 50 years, including wars in Vietnam and the Middle East, Henry Kissinger and the Nixon White House, fateful U.S. moves to help the Shah of Iran, and tumultuous domestic politics. What an incredible scope in terms of your career. How do you begin to boil that down in terms of what stories to tell, what anecdotes to focus on? What's that process like?
Well, first of all, it indicates I can't keep a job, obviously. But, I did move along. I'd say the New York Times was the most formative, certainly the most formative period for me. And 20 years at home and abroad, and so that was a major impact. How did I do it? I simply I thought, well, the fact that I went off to cover the Six-Day War in Israel in June of 1967 on literally a moment's notice for a first foreign assignment, that seemed like the logical place to start. So I did. I just simply started the account. And then I backed up a bit in a second chapter and said that newspapering and journalism was kind of a natural path for me. There was a point when all 5 working males in the extended Smith family were all writing for New York City newspapers.
Oh, really?
At the same time. One was my father, Red Smith, first for the Herald Tribune, and then, of course, for the New York Times, where he won his Pulitzer. The first sports columnist to win the Pulitzer for commentary in 1976. And then my uncle Art Smith, who was writing a column for the Herald Tribune and the Daily News before that, called Pavement's End. It was a outdoors column. my cousin Pat Smith, who was covering both sports and business, and me. And then along came Georgia Delier to the New York Times, and as one of their outstanding feature writers and probably the best of the bunch. So as you can imagine, when there was a citywide newspaper strike in New York, as happened in those days, it was a very significant event in the Smith family. But we managed to survive them and went on. And so that's where I started in the book. And then I wrote about the transition to television. This was by then 1985, and I'd been doing some guest spots on Washington Week in Review and things like that. And along came CBS with a proposition to do some interviews for them from Washington and ultimately to cover the White House. So I did that and greatly enjoyed it. And then was lured into, by one Charles Kuralt, into the world of CBS Sunday Morning. Still a great broadcast in my view. And I enjoyed 9 years there doing the cover stories for CBS Sunday Morning, and did them all over the world, literally, and but certainly all over the country. So, and then along comes Jim Lehrer at one point, and he says, "I've gotten a grant from the Pew Charitable Trust to create a media unit in the NewsHour to report and critique and analyze the news business. How about you? Would you do that?" So the idea intrigued me. And so I left CBS and went to the NewsHour. I went to PBS and did that. I started it up, had to hire the people and get it going. And it was quite successful. And I enjoyed that for a while. The Pew Charitable Trust, wonderful funders. They gave you the money and they never interfered. $1 million a year they'd fund this operation. And they signed up initially to do it for 3 years. They did it for 7.
Wow.
And so no grounds for complaint when they finally decided to move on, and so did I.
Sure.
So that's the thumbnail of why I can't keep a job.
Well, you mentioned your father earlier, and Naomi Service put a comment. Love Red Smith. I'm reading the Red Smith Reader right now.
Oh,
brilliant pedigree. Do you have that?
I absolutely do. Right over here, just a few feet from me. That was the first of a whole series, I think a dozen collections of his columns. And it was, I think, very well done. It was edited by, with a foreword, I think, by Dave Anderson.
Dave Anderson from the Times as well.
Of the New York Times. And it was terrific. Then more recently, there's a book called American Pastimes, the very best of Red Smith. And that came out, it was brought out by the Library of America just a couple of years ago, with edited by Dan Okren. And I think is an especially good collection, but they both are. They're very good. And
here are a couple of pictures that are in your book from of your father. That's you and your father on the left, right?
Yeah, we're standing overlooking Masada in Israel. It was, I think, 1967, the fall. He's obviously on the right there. He came to visit us in Israel. I had just arrived there 6 months earlier as I stress, as a boy correspondent, still in diapers. But he came and we had a great trip traveling around Israel, and then we went to Cyprus for a while. The picture on the right is one that was taken when he was writing on deadline, probably after a prize fight or some event like that. And I note, if you look on the floor, a couple of crumpled pages, first tries that evidently he didn't like very much.
And your memoir, and it covers your career, but there's also, and we'll talk about some of the anecdotes and some of the stories in it. But while we're talking about your father, it's also a homage to your father as well, correct?
It is. It's more than that, really, Neil. It's an attempt to describe both the opportunities and the challenges that come to somebody like me who chooses to go into the same profession as a very well-known father in this case. And there are obviously opportunities because you know a lot of people in the business and you've grown up knowing them. And so getting your foot in the door is easier for sure. But there are challenges as well, because you're inevitably compared to him and you're trying to carve your own path and so forth. It was incidentally a very good relationship between the two of us. And I found him constantly encouraging and as a mentor, and also a very good editor. He would read what I wrote, and when we could, we'd talk about it. And he'd either like it or not like it or comment on it, but it was always constructive, and I appreciated it. So I had a good in-house editor as well.
That's great. That's just incredible to have that relationship, particularly being in the same field, to be able to connect with him on that. You wrote a great piece on as a remembrance. I think it was on the 100th anniversary of his birth, going to a ball game and reflecting on what his thoughts would be about the modern state of baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this: he could never have imagined the contracts that ball players get today in the hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases. That would have been quite extraordinary to him.
Much less the wild cards and instant replay, everything that they're doing. I'm a huge baseball fan, as many of our viewers know. But there's so many things that have happened in the game to try and make it more interesting, to get younger kids more involved, to keep their attention. Some of them, I think, have worked to a certain degree. Having additional wild cards made for a very interesting month of September, certainly. But some of the other the changes that they've done, more specifically, even recently limiting pitchers to three, making pitchers pitch to three batters. It's just a very different game than it was 50 years ago or so, I assume that's when your father was covering.
Exactly right. He won his Pulitzer in 1976 and he died in 1982.
Yeah.
So, but credits to Abe Rosenthal, who hired him after the Tribune folded and gave him, in effect, a great final chapter in his career. Anyway, go ahead. But Carla, raised an interesting question the other day. She said, when the Times sent you off to Israel, did they give you any preparation, any training, anything, language, anything? I had to laugh. That's little desert reporting down in the Sinai in that picture. I had to laugh because the answer was absolutely no. I was scheduled to go in June of 1967, late June. And in late May, Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran and war seemed imminent. And A. Rosenthal called me. I was in Washington at the State Department. And he said, can you go? Can you go tonight? This being a month before I was scheduled to go. And I said, no, I don't have my passport. I'm here in Washington. I'll come home, but I can go tomorrow. And indeed I did. I went into the New York Times. I got several $1,000s in cash. I got a camera, maybe another typewriter, I don't recall, and took a plane that night. So I got there just 10 days before the war. And, you know, it couldn't have been a better or faster or a more immediate introduction to the whole business of foreign correspondence, which was something I'd wanted to pursue for a long time. And so really all my life. So it was a great opportunity. And as people know who've done it, you know so little when you arrive. After 6 months, the old saying goes, the foreign correspondent thinks he or she is an expert on the country. And only after about 3 years do you know how little you know. And does your understanding even begin to comprehend the country and its complexities?
And that's about when you'll be cycled out, right?
Typically, that's right. Because of the war, the Times elected to keep the resident correspondent, Jim Lehrer, on. And then foreign editor Seymour Top asked me first to go to Bangkok as the Southeast Asian correspondent, and then to move over to Saigon as the New York Times bureau chief there in December of 1968 through 1970, through the invasion of Cambodia. And so I ended up going, came home to Washington and covered the State Department, and then wanted to go overseas again. And what came up but Jerusalem again? And I'd only been there less than a year. So I said, absolutely yes. And this time I went for a full 4-year assignment, which was typical of the time. And took my family and lived there and covered the country. And of course, that encompassed the Yom Kippur War in 1973. In October in this month in 1973.
October, absolutely. So about 48 years ago, specifically. I wanted to share a couple of comments. Jessica was quoting you, you know so little when you arrive as a foreign correspondent. And Carla was talking about earlier in terms of growing up in Minnesota, far from New York, but everyone knew about your father, Red Smith, as a sports writer. And you had Carla worked at the New York Times, of course. Jess also wanted to thank you for your Sunday morning cover stories that were really enjoyable. I
love doing those. That if you're in television, you know, time is everything. And if you're working for the evening news, you do a piece, it might be 1:45, that's typical. But if you're working for Sunday morning, you can let it breathe a bit. And a typical cover story will be anywhere from, in those days, from 9 to 11 minutes. And it was Carol who came to me and saw maybe a few pieces I'd done. And he said, why don't you come and do some cover stories for us? Because you'll let it breathe a bit. You'll be able to put a little more effort into the writing, and I think you'll enjoy it. And he was absolutely right.
I want to remind people that we're talking about Terry's new book, and that if you go to Rowman.com, ROWMAN, the publisher's page, and use the code RLFAND30, if I got that right, waiting for it to come back around again, RLFANDF30, you can get 30% off on the book, and certainly want to encourage you to check that out. Some of the pictures from...
Neil, that's the website of Rowman and Littlefield.
Yes.
That's the full name of the publisher. And they do offer that 30% discount. And there are various ways to order it, either online or however you like.
Absolutely. I want to show some of the pictures from the book. This one is one of the earlier ones. And you really made your made your reputation at the time. That's how you came to the Times, if I'm not mistaken, is your coverage of the RFK campaign. And this is you interviewing Senator Kennedy on a television panel back in 1966. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was working when he ran in 1964 for the Senate in New York and won. It was an absolutely vintage campaign, and I was covering it for the New York Herald Tribune, and was excited to be doing it. It was, as I say, an absolutely vintage, classic campaign. My competition from the New York Times was formidable. Homer Biggert and R.W. Johnny Apple were covering the campaign for the Times. So I had my work cut out for me. But it went pretty well. And at the end of it, Abe Rosenthal and Arthur Gelb got a hold of me and invited me to come over to the Times and work for them. Abe, we had a luncheon at Sardi's. They invited me over to talk about it. And at one point in the lunch, I think Times people might enjoy this. Abe says to me, well, what would be your ambitions at the longer term at the New York Times? And I said, well, I want to go overseas. I've always wanted to go overseas. Well, Abe, who's Metropolitan editor at that time, just blows up. And he says, wait a minute, wait. I'm hiring you to join the Metropolitan staff. I am building the best Metropolitan staff, in the history of man. And he goes on like this. And I see, and I sort of raised his voice in Sardi's. I was looking around at others on the table, other tables nearby. And Arthur Gelb was sitting there, and he's just smiling. He's seen this performance before by Abe. And fine. So I said to Abe, well, wait a minute. How can you be upset at that notion? You won your Pulitzers. You yourself had great assignments overseas in Poland and India and Japan. Well, all right, he says. So Abe calms down at that. He says, okay, I'll make you a deal. Come and work for me on the Metropolitan staff for 1 year. And if you still want to go overseas, I won't stand in your way. Now, what he obviously thought was it would be so thrilling and riveting to work for Abe for a year that I wouldn't ever want to leave. But in fact, at the end of the year, I did go to Seymour Topping and asked Top for a foreign assignment. And Abe was good to his word. He did not stand in my way. So, but I mean, that's was a sort of classic Rosenthal performance.
And Carla is reminding us that last fall, I think it was, summer, fall, we had Abe's son on the show as a guest. So that was also
and Andrew. Andrew, of course, had a great career at the Times as well.
Dr. Chandrasekhar is saying how brave to utter your goals out loud, and in that setting, in that meeting. A colleague of yours, Ralph, is asking, how about that star-studded newsroom when we began there? Homer, Pete, any memories of that?
Keys? Oh, heavens. I think Meyer Berger was still around. In any event, I mean, they were full of stars. David Halberstam, Gay Talese. In fact, when I showed up the first day at the New York Times, and I came into this vast newsroom, this is at 229 West 43rd Street, block-wide newsroom, and these rows of desks. They gave me a desk next to Gay Talese. And he leans over to me and says, welcome. And I said, what are you up to right now? He said, I am busy writing my way off this paper. And that was his ambition, and that's what he did. Halberstam headed off, I think, first to Poland, then, of course, famously to Vietnam.
And so a few more pictures from the book. This one with Jimmy Carter. Tell us what's going on over your left shoulder.
Well, I love this shot. I'm interviewing Carter I covered his presidency, and I'm interviewing him at the foot of Air Force One on some occasion. And I think you'll recognize Sam Donaldson leaning in over my left shoulder there. Absolutely classic Donaldson pose.
Yeah. And then following Carter, so you spent some time with President Reagan as well.
I covered, this is by now for CBS News, I covered Reagan's second term. And and I write about this in the book. I mean, Reagan was impossible not to like as an individual. Was he a bit gaga towards the end? Was he losing it towards the end of his second term? Of course. Did he mess up with the Iran-Contra scandal and other things? Of course. But individually, as long as you could stand hearing the same Hollywood stories over and over again, it was impossible not to like him personally.
And Patricia Freudenberg is asking, did you ever get to work with the late Jim Dwyer? We actually produced a memorial service for him, for his family last year. Was it last year already? And what incredibly moving experience to get to know his family. Did you work with Jim?
I did not. A great admirer, but I did not.
Yeah, it must not have overlapped as much.
Yeah.
That's great. And Sonny also is endorsing Dr. Chandrasekhar's comment from earlier. Love how you told him what you really wanted up front. Let's go on. There's one more, a couple more pictures I want to show. This one is with Vice President Mondale aboard Air Force Two. And you wrote a column, wrote a piece about this trip. This is a trip to Asia, right?
Yes, a very long 26,000-mile trip throughout Southeast Asia down to Australia and New Zealand. And it was made very little news, frankly. But it was a great trip. And I really admired and liked Mondale very much. He's being a little sarcastic here with his endorsement to Terry, my advisor. Fritz, wonderful guy who, as you probably know, died recently.
Of course. What was he like in terms of his interactions with the press when the cameras were off?
He was wonderful. Very approachable, very open, very relaxed with the press. On that trip, there's a small story. We went to a dozen countries, and time after time, Air Force Two would land in, say, Bangkok or Manila, and there was no one there. No, I mean, there'd be an official greeter, but there was no crowd, no attention being paid. So we started kidding Mondale about this. And every time we'd say, they've never heard of you here. This is terrible. And we kept needling him and ribbing him as we went from country to country. And finally, on our last stop, we arrive and land in Wellington, New Zealand, where he is to have a summit, if you want to call it that, have a meeting with Piggy Muldoon. That was the Sir Robert Muldoon was the Prime Minister of New Zealand at the time, and he was a rather heavy-set, hard-drinking conservative, known universally in his country as Piggy Muldoon. Not very flattering, but that's what he was. So as we look out, we land, we see there is a big crowd waiting for the plane to pull up. And they have placards and they're waving signs and so forth. And Mondale comes shooting back from the front of the plane from his cabin and says to us, points out the window, he says, look, I'm very big here in Wellington. You people, you don't appreciate it. And so we said, yeah, well, that's a crowd. There's no question. The plane comes around, and finally we get close enough to see the signs and read the signs. And it says, Mondale Muldoon, a close encounter of a turd kind. And so Mondale was crushed and retreated back to his back to his cabin up in the front.
That's always fun to get the backstory. What presidents are like in your case when the camera's off and when people aren't. Just to know that they're human, that they actually have a sense of humor, that they don't take themselves, too seriously. They can appreciate a good joke like that. That's always good.
I write about first Nixon, who I interviewed when I joined the Times. I went and interviewed Nixon. He was at a law firm in New York, Nixon Mudge, and had in the course of the interview, he exactly predicted the outcome of the 1966 congressional campaign. He'd gone around the country gathering chits from Republican candidates, and he exactly predicted the outcome of the congressional election in 1966, and I was pretty impressed with that until I found out that a college classmate of mine, John Sears, had traveled all the way with Nixon. And he was the one who calculated who would win and who would lose. He was the one who came up with the exact estimate of the outcome of the congressional election down to the number, not Nixon. So it was my first suggestion that maybe what you see is not all what you get with Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Interesting. Well, let's move on to the newspaper. It's 9:20, and we certainly have a lot to cover and a lot to review. And we already mentioned that front page story. So let's dig in there. We'll pull the newspaper up. We're using pencil cam again, which you see it's a little bit of a different angle. I tried to make it a little higher to see the whole front page. But this is that story, 90 Seconds of Rage on the Capitol Steps, which is a very powerful piece. And this is obviously about the January 6th insurrection. It focuses on several individuals that were caught up in a particular exchange, a particular melee, if you will. But even before we get into that, I want to show both the paper. Actually, we'll show that first. This is the front page, the display image. You can see the flag being used as a weapon there. And then go to the jump on 22. Let's see what we can see here with the paper. So we'll bring this in. This is one of the sections. You see this huge photo in the middle. This is one of the individuals that they tracked down, who was just, upset afterward. They have 7 suspects, a nice layout, the 7 suspects that they are focusing on in this story. Some of the other pictures here, and then another 2 pages in between. And what's really interesting, and we'll take a closer look here, in this top right corner, you can see that they've identified 7 of the individuals that participated in this specific kind of 90 seconds. And what's interesting in the way that Dan Barry writes this story is that these individuals have all the superlatives that neighbors would say of them. They're a great neighbor, very important to the church, great with kids, always helping. These are not people, I mean, for the most part, you wouldn't have expected them to react this way. It really does say something about mob mentality, and people were really surprised. These individuals were surprised by what happened that day. You had an interesting comment when we were chatting about this, Terry. This is a particular type of journalism.
It really is. Yeah,
right?
It really is, Neil. I mean, I think this is, first of all, it's a great piece. It's beautifully written. It's very well done. It's richly, deeply reported, as you've just indicated. But in addition to that, this is a great example of the value of re-reporting a big story, of going back over events and participants, in this case, in a big event 9 months later or whatever it is, and learning so much more. I mean, the first draft of history, right? That's the old saying about newspaper reporting. Well, the second draft is a lot better, and it gives you a deeper understanding. I had an experience of that, again, at the behest of A. Rosenthal in 1980, after finishing covering the Carter administration. At Abe's suggestion, I re-reported the last days of the Shah of Iran. And I traveled from Panama to Paris to interview people. I discovered the roles played by David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, and John J. McCloy in persuading Carter against his better judgment to admit the Shah to the United States, which led directly to the takeover of the 52 hostages in Tehran and effectively ended Carter's presidency. So it was worth going over, and I discovered some fascinating things that you couldn't have known at the time. And this Dan Barry story is a perfect example of that. It's also beautifully written.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I want to spend some time on this, in particular, there are so many people out there, particularly Republicans, who are downplaying what happened, who are dismissing what happened as tourists walking through the Capitol as it not being real. I want to kind of share that, share that perspective, the counter perspective. My neighbor is a member of the Capitol Police Force. He's on bike patrol there. He was close friends with Brian Sicknick, one of the officers who died after January 6th. He died, just like the day after, I think. This was very real. This was an incredible moment. I remember watching it on TV. I remember talking to my neighbor the day after. I just can't believe how there are people out there who just deny this is happening. I mean, it's on the level of Holocaust deniers who just want to pretend all this evidence isn't real. I want to share the video that is on the New York Times website so that we also share, and I'll share the comment that Apollo put up as well in just a moment. He, let's see if I can find that real quick. Apollo said he saw the video and was moved by it. Let's see here. Scrolling down. Let's see if I'll get to it in just a moment. And now I can't find it, unfortunately. So I'll see if I can find it maybe after the video. But let's go ahead and watch the video and see how the Times put that together. Let me bring that back up here. Let's see. I want to make sure we get the audio when we share it. There we go. So 1 minute video. Here they're highlighting the individuals in the story.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the, the debate, if you will, or the counterclaim is you can see they're clearly pulling the officers out and beating them. And some of the individuals involved are claiming that they were trying to save the officers. They were trying to get them to safety, which is just ridiculous. You covered wars, Terry. What are your thoughts when you see that?
Well, it's really powerful and really interesting. That's an event that many of us watched live. I did. And we've seen many videos since and recreations. And yet I would argue we learn more from that story than today's story, that is, about the people involved. Not necessarily the ringleaders, if you like, but the participants. And that's what's so valuable. And that's what really adds to your understanding. The remarkable thing about that video is that it captured those 7 people all more or less together there as they're dragging the Capitol Police out and beating them. And so I must say, the prosecution has a rather powerful weapon when it comes to all these people are charged with multiple charges.
And Apollo's comment, the shot doesn't wear off. Absolutely.
That's absolutely right. So it's very impressive, and I think it's great that the Times took the time and effort and expense to go back over what is a very widely covered event.
Dr. Chandrasekhar was saying they were seeing it. They had it on in the waiting room and were watching, which was incredible.
Yeah. I don't know about you. I had turned on the television to watch. I wanted to see what Trump said in his remarks. And so I had the television on. It was whatever it was, 1 PM Eastern time. Excuse me. And then I went to, I just left it on. And I saw the march. And then I saw it get out of control. I had it on for, 2-3 hours. And yet this still opens my eyes to additional aspects of it.
And Ellen, poses a good comment, questioning the use of the term mob mentality. I think, when you read the article, the interesting thing is these 7 individuals that they're highlighting are completely unrelated. It's not 7 individuals from a particular cluster, a group with Proud Boys or something that went in together with a plan. They came from Georgia, from Pennsylvania, from the Midwest. I think Iowa maybe was one of them. They ended up in the same place at the same time, engaged in this behavior. And what's interesting is not just kind of their approach. Like one of the people drove up with his wife and sister-in-law, I think it was, in their rental car, parked on Constitution Avenue, took in the sights the day before, and then went to the rally. Or that day, they were surprised that their car was towed. And then when they, the next day when they went to the rally, he left his family and got into the middle of the action. I think that there is something. I mean, what happens in a crowd like that? I think people are emboldened. People have a different sense of themselves and what they might do, what they wouldn't do. If you are sitting at home and planning a trip, I don't think people. There's some people who do plan to go and cause mayhem, but there's some people who will actually go up. I'll share my own story. Nothing like this by any means. But in college, I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and there was a rally for need-blind admissions, and we went there to rally in front of a board of trustees meeting, and we were all chanting at a distance away from their meeting room. They had windows, and then as we were chanting, we started moving around the side of the building, around the other way. And I actually, joined a few other people and climbed the terrace and got up onto the balcony. I didn't charge the room. I didn't go through and cause violence. My idea was that I was going to get up there and then chant from, a closer distance to where people were. I didn't go there thinking that I was going to climb a wall, turn a garbage can over and jump up and keep chanting. There's something that happens when you're in a crowd. There's something that happens. And to Ellen's point, no, we would never, go to a rally to support a president who lost. I wouldn't, Sri wouldn't, I assume you wouldn't as well, Terry. Right. But this piece is a real interesting deep dive into these 7 individuals, their lives before and after what happened, and it's fascinating to the work that Dan did on that piece.
Remember, Neil, that they had been revved up by President.
Yes, absolutely.
By Rudy Giuliani and other speakers at that rally. They had been fired up and sent on their way down to march to the Capitol, and they had a goal. At least the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers among them, which was to stop the certification of Biden.
Yes.
And they didn't succeed, but that was the goal. So it was, on some levels, mob mentality, and on other levels, very purposeful.
There was certainly leadership. There was certainly organization. There were certainly people who went with intent, with zip ties and walkie-talkies and intel on how members of Congress would be spirited away, where they'd be hidden. There's a lot to be uncovered in terms of ties to members of Congress who may have helped the day before, showing people where to come in, etc. That goes without saying. Absolutely, it wasn't. I'm not making a point that everybody was innocent when they came in, but when you look at a crowd like that and you see the frenzy that they get into, it is absolutely incredible. Carla has an interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on the courage of journalists who are on the scene covering the attack?
Absolutely, and I know several, including from the NewsHour, a young woman correspondent, Lisa Desjardins, who was there in the Capitol. I mean, that's her beat. She covers Congress. And there were any number of them who were exposed, at risk, and covered it. Talk about covering a battle. They were covering it from the inside. They were potential victims as well. So I think their courage, as Carla says, was really on display. Absolutely.
Let's go back to the rest of the paper and see what else we have in store. When we look inside, we have the page 2 and 3. The insider column, which is always my favorite, is taking the crossword for a test solve. A team of 10 testers, fact checkers, and reviewers vet each clue and answer. There's also the of interest section with little tidbits about what's going to be in the paper to kind of draw you in. The rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar began as what composer Andrew Lloyd Webber calls a musical radio play meant to be listened to straight through for 90 minutes without any visuals. That's in the arts and leisure section. There's also a spotlight section and the sketchbook, In for a Treat for Little Ghosts and Goblins. It was a good omen. Dr. Fauci said that Halloween is on, falling coronavirus cases, vaccine eligible parents and teens, and the low risk of outdoor transmission make for safe trick-or-treating. Let the costume selection begin. That's huge, particularly for my daughter who's 8 years old. It's nice to know that we can go trick-or-treating and feel a little more comfortable doing that. And I can hear her in the background yelling, I can go trick-or-treating. So she's thrilled to hear that. We have the international section, dismantling the gangs in a Venezuelan town, a rum bottle at a time. So some good international coverage. We also like to see the front full page ads from the New York Times. This is New York's 92nd Street Y, a full page ad. There's no other place like this. They do some great events, great programming. They are also, Giving Tuesday, a great event after Black Friday, Cyber Monday, a day to give back to nonprofits, came out of the 92nd Street Y as well. After election, Iraqi cleric once targeted by U.S. emerges as a vital ally. In Beirut, old fault lines threaten years of peace. So closer to some of the areas that you covered
That's right. And boy, that story out of Beirut suggests pay some attention there, because it's a failed state at this point, and various forces are competing for power, and it's a powder keg. And if I was a foreign editor, as I once was, I would make sure I had people on the scene.
The front page ad on the right is for Berkeley, shaping the future by challenging convention. This is a congratulatory ad that UC Berkeley commends David Card, class of 1950 professor of economics and co-winner of the 2021 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. This is that article I mentioned on the front page, shaking the godfather and godmother out of the picture in Sicily, taking the idea of not naming godparents for children so that you don't strengthen ties. They're trying to address mob ties in Sicily. I still remember when we named Emily's godparents, we chose my eldest cousin that I grew up with in the States and my wife's eldest cousin. We didn't go for a married couple, but we went with cousins on both sides. And that was just a very meaningful ceremony, meaningful relationship for her. Here's a story out of the UK. Morning lawmaker, UK fronts a new case of terrorism. If people aren't familiar with this, there was a Conservative MP who was doing constituent meetings, and this was what they do. They call it surgery because of their GPs. They call them like surgery hours. That one-on-one meetings, and he was stabbed after a meeting and died. And really, it's questioning one of the bedrock foundations of the British system. Terry, did you see that article? Did you have any thoughts?
Yes, I did. And you know that the authorities in Britain have determined and decided that this was an act of terrorism.
Yeah.
And they are pursuing it and prosecuting it as an act of terrorism. So it's, the sort of thing you don't expect, right? And it was extraordinary, I thought. I read it very closely.
Absolutely. Moving on, we have this article about the effort to rescue a young burn victim half a world away. This was from Afghanistan. This is a full-page ad. This one for Dope Sick on Hulu. Do you have any shows you particularly watch, Terry?
I do. I watch a number of them on Netflix, and especially, and not that particular one, but as you're pointing out, there are some actual ads in the New York Times.
Yes.
Today, isn't that nice to see? I mean,
it's not a failing newspaper.
Well, no, it's not failing, but it's display advertising is failing in large measure. There's so little of it, especially during the week. But I noticed that in today's paper, there are more ads than usual.
A lot of full-page ads. There's this story about lead-tainted water flows in another Michigan city. This is Benton Harbor, Michigan. Of course, everyone is familiar with what happened in Flint, Michigan. I actually went out there when I was working with United Way, when our local United Way was helping distribute water right after the pipes were, the lead was discovered there. Just an incredible story. Newark is another city that was dealing with lead in lead pipes. Here's another full-page ad from the Cultural Landscape Foundation announcing the winner of the 2021 Oberlander Prize. I guess. And what's interesting to me is, again, to your point, this shows that it's still worth getting a full page ad in the New York Times. It's still worth that investment.
Yeah, evidently organizations in that case do it. But it's just not what you see every day during the week, I'll tell you that.
Sure. Here's an article that the Virginia candidate talks about his state. His base talks about Trump living in Virginia. This is something that is very disturbing. Glenn Youngkin is the Republican. They had a rally recently where they all, and Steve Bannon, I think, led that rally. They took the Pledge of Allegiance in front of a flag that was used at the January 6th insurrection. Now, the candidate wasn't there, and he disavowed it afterward. But still, it shows, and it's a tight race here in Virginia. So it's something that my wife and I are very worried about in terms of if he should win, what Glenn Youngkin will do in terms of mask mandates and the general response to coronavirus, much less other political issues, but specifically, I mean, we're thankful we don't live in Florida or Texas, where the governors there have penalized school districts for issuing mask mandates and passed laws to forbid businesses from requiring masks. Just incredible that could possibly happen here.
And Neil, that's an example, that story, of the way in which the Trump phenomenon is still influencing and even dominating Republican politics at the state level and, of course, the congressional level. It's amazing to me that he continues to have the resonance among his followers that he does. This is somebody I met back in the late 1970s when he was being applauded for managing to repair and reopen the Woolman ice rink in Central Park in the shadow of the Plaza Hotel. And that was his claim to fame in those days. But now here's an influence, I would say a malign influence on American politics that is clearly not going away in the impact it's having on races like Virginia governorship or numerous other congressional races, Liz Cheney and the others. So it's going to be a factor, at least in 2022. People keep asking me whether I think he is going to run again, really going to run again in 2024. And obviously I don't know. But my instinct is that his legal and financial troubles will mount up and make it very difficult for him to run. So
absolutely,
that's my expectation.
Going on with the rest of the paper, we have the Neediest Cases Fund. We have this story about a governor in Missouri accusing a journalist of hacking, and not happy because the journalist uncovered problems with a website and actually didn't report it until it was fixed, which is interesting. But still, the governor is attacking the reporter. Here are the pages from that 90 Seconds of Rage article again, and some additional coverage of what's going on in Congress with climate change. This is the article, War Chests Fill Up Early in the Fight for Congress. That was the lead, actually. And then the obituaries. Brian Goldner, Hasbro's chief executive, who he died at 58, 2 days after stepping down. When he was sick. Just a very incredible story. Mike Renzi, arranger of countless megastars. Andrea Martin, 49, singer who wrote R&B songs. And Eric Cassell, who focused on patients as people. Terry, did you write any obits or advanced obits for the Times?
I did over the years, of course, not as a regular assignment, but I certainly did, particularly when they were obits about people I had covered or knew in the past. Maybe
Sure.
it's a factor of my age, but I find I read the obits very, very closely these days, and I also, of course, always look to see if they're older or younger than me. But I guess we all do that. There was an old line. Jimmy Cannon was a crusty New York City sports writer years ago. He lived in a hotel, and he claimed, and it was one of his standard lines, that he would wake up in the morning, open the paper, look at the obituary page, and if he wasn't on it, then he would get up and go about his day.
It's a good day.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. I want to just note for folks who are interested in honoring loved ones, there's a great app called Miss You Gram. Miss You Gram. It's an app you can use to honor those who have passed away. You can find it on both iOS and Android. And check that out when you get a chance. I want to go back to a conversation we were having just a moment ago, and a friend of mine, Renea Sabri, I want to give her a shout out. Renea is actually from Egypt. I lived in Egypt for 2 years back in 03 to 05. And Renea just moved here to Virginia. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon, Renea. But her question, but is it really about Trump, or does he represent a mindset? And even if he doesn't run, there will always be a group of people adopting Trumpism. Now, that's an interesting idea, because in Egypt, we talk about the idea of, under Hosni Mubarak, after the revolution, we have General Sisi, and it's, Mubarakism without Mubarak. You don't have that same leader. Could we have Trumpism without Trump?
Oh, I think we will for sure, and I agree with her point. The Trump tapped into a not very attractive but quite real strain of thought and emotion in the American body politic, and he exploited it. He capitalized on it. He got himself elected 4 years, etc. But those basic instincts that make up what we call Trumpism are there. They're there in the public, and they're not going to go away whether he goes to jail, or which he won't, or disappears, as we all will. But those sentiments, fear of immigrants, fear of so many things, will still be there, I think. Incidentally, Neil, before you finish, are you going to say anything about Nick Kristof and his remarkable decision this week, or have you already discussed it?
No, we haven't discussed it. Well, it's a weekly show, so anything that happens during the week is game. For folks who are not familiar, Nick Kristof decided to leave the Times to very seriously explore a run for governor in Oregon. He's from Oregon. He's written about how people are challenged with the economy there, and he stepped down. His writing is incredible. We've actually had the pleasure of working with him. We organized a social media weekend last year. He was one of the keynote speakers. He and his wife Cheryl Udon. And we highlight his work on the show as much as we can. But the fact that he's stepping down to run for governor is really interesting. That's step from journalism to public office.
Can you think of, or can anyone think of a comparable case of somebody at the Times who went, made this switch from journalism to elective politics?
I was going to ask the same question, Terry. I can't think of another example.
Nor I.
Which is, it's just interesting. I'm sure, I know he's done polling. I'm sure he was exploring it earlier. I'm sure he wouldn't have taken this step of actually stepping down if he didn't think he had a very serious chance of winning. It doesn't seem like it's a quixotic attempt. It's not like Matthew McConaughey thinking about running for governor of Texas. I can only hope and only assume that if Nick is doing this, he's doing it to win.
Oh, I have no doubt. I read in the article that he, pursuing Times policy, revealed in June, several months ago, that he was contemplating this.
Yes.
And stepped down from his column so that it wouldn't be a, pulpit.
Sure.
Him, according to Times practices. And now he has taken the decisive step. So I have to believe that this is, this is a serious run for governor.
And Carl, I can't think of a similar situation either. It really is, I think, unprecedented. Specifically with the Times, of course. I think at the local level, you would have examples of local newspapers, local editors or publishers being involved in politics and vice versa, but not at this level, not someone of Nick's stature by any means. I want to,
Neil, I'm kidding you, but you use the word unprecedented. And one of the first instructions I got when I came to the New York Times from Theodore Bernstein, the great wordsmith, he said, nothing is unprecedented. Not in American life and modern life. So don't use the word. It's not ever right.
Well, going back to the beginning of the show, and as my mom's comment comes back up, she's offering a serious comment now about Trump's followers are blind followers and people who are stuck in January 6th, protecting their lives. They changed their stories. Absolutely. Certainly agree with that, understand that. But I will have to say, Terry, that for folks who were with us at the beginning, when I was saying hello to my mom and going like this,
yeah,
that was unprecedented. That had never happened on the show before. So sometimes I think the term works. I want to show one quick ad at the end of at the back of the paper, and I'll put it in full screen so you can see it. On the right-hand side, as professional athletes, our bodies are our instruments, our livelihoods, our craft. Bold-facing, instruments, livelihood, craft. This is from the Women's National Basketball Players Association. Reproductive rights are human rights. Family planning is freedom. Our demand is simple, reproductive rights now. I highlight this because another shout out to the women of the WNBA taking the lead, showing real leadership, both during Black Lives Matter, but also on this question of reproductive rights, particularly the assault in Texas. So I wanted to give them a shout out for that. So it is 9:56. We got through exactly one section of the paper. Terry, I'm going to use the word again, unprecedented. Usually we get through more of the paper by now. We had a lot of interesting sections. We're going to have to look at them online. We're going to have to encourage people to, if you subscribe to the paper, look for your print edition. But if you don't, make sure to see what you can online, because there definitely were some interesting sections there. What I'd like to do, Terry, before we close, I'm going to make a few announcements and then bring you back for a final word about your book. We'll talk also a little bit more about your family, but if you can also share a pro tip with our readers from your years in journalism, we would definitely appreciate that. So I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of break in terms of screen time. And again, thank everyone for joining us. Our guest today has been Terry Smith. Next week, we have an equally impressive guest, Tina Jordan, the deputy editor of the New York Times Book Review, will be joining us to celebrate the 125th anniversary of the book review. There's a sneak peek of next week's cover of the book review section. We're so thrilled that Tina will be joining us, and it's just incredible. We have had such an incredible series of guests and opportunities. Ranks up there with going to Amy Vership's house to talk about the 52 places to go back in January. So we're looking forward to Tina Jordan joining us next week. I want to thank again our Digimentors colleagues and producers of the New York Times Read Along, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. They help bring the show to you every week. And Carla Baranakis in particular helps put out the Local Connection newsletter put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. I mentioned She's on Call earlier. She's on Call airs every other Sunday. This week they have off, but they'll be on next Sunday. You can find them at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and YouTube. So check them out. Dr. Chandrasekhar has been watching with us today. Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhar. With that, I'm going to bring Terry back to offer his final thoughts. And again, I want to remind people about the book, 4 Wars, 5 Presidents, a reporter's journey from Jerusalem to Saigon to the White House. Terry, thank you so much for being our guest today. Any final thoughts?
Well, I do have a tip, pretty obvious one, but it prompts a story from the book. My tip is to any journalist, maybe to any person, don't believe everything you hear. And I'll give you an example. On the eve of the Six-Day War in 1967, between Israel and her Arab neighbors, we geniuses in the foreign press, and mind you, I'd been there all of 10 days, believed then Defense Minister Moshe Dayan when he said at a press conference that Israel was going to give diplomacy more time in order to resolve its dispute with Egypt. And we believed it, had a nice party that night. And of course, the next morning at dawn, Israel's Air Force launched the attack against Egypt and Syria and eventually Jordan. And so I'd say the life lesson here is whenever you hear a military official, especially an Israeli, say they're going to give diplomacy more time, then I'd head right away for the bomb shelters as your lesson.
Thank you very much, Terry. One of the pictures we didn't get a chance to look at earlier, if you could just give us a little bit of background. This shot 3 generations of Smiths.
That's correct. That's me in the foreground, my son Chris at age 10 in the middle, and my father in the background there. And we are sitting in the owner's box of what was then called the Washington Redskins. Ed Bennett Williams was our host, and we were there, as we sometimes were, and somebody took this shot. Today is, of course, the Washington football team, and the most amazing thing is, after 2 years of giving up the name Redskins, they still have not been able to come up with a new name, which I find quite extraordinary. But
that is interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to share some of the comments that came in. Ellen is saying another great show, and she agrees. We can look at the paper ourselves when the guest is so interesting. Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Ellen, as well. We have Ralph saying it wasn't quite the same thing, but Andy Malcolm quit to become a top aide to the governor of Montana.
Yes. Yeah.
So certainly not the same thing. Ron Thomas, our friend from Dubai, such a great guest. Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. Jess saying kind of a smiley nothing is unprecedented. We'll be talking about that for a while, I'm sure. Carla shared a quote from Nick. I've been on the ride of a lifetime with the Times. I've gotten to know presidents and tyrants, Nobel laureates and warlords while visiting 160 countries, and precisely because I have a great job, outstanding editors and best readers, I may be an idiot to leave. Only if he loses. Let's hope he wins. Jess saying this is great. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Chandrasekhar, WNBA rules and their viewership is skyrocketing, which is great. Thank you, Mom, for a very informative show. Rose Horowitz saying thank you. Great conversation with an amazing guest. Sonny, thank you for sharing your insight and experiences. Allison Webster Giddings, thank you. Terry Smith is always insightful. Terry, is this someone you know?
Yes, she's a next door neighbor.
Next door neighbor. Thank you, Allison, for watching. That's
out of town now, but somehow has come across this.
With the magic of Facebook, I'm sure. Patricia, mic dropping revelations, a great quote. Don't believe everything you hear. To your Moshe Dayan story. Apollo, this is a great show and conversation. We'll close with one more thought. Naomi would like to know, how do you feel about the abused irregardless?
That was a killer phrase when I was growing up in my household. It's obviously illiterate and not to be used. And we even had a glass bowl on the table of the sort of kitchen table, and you had to throw a quarter in if you used a cliche or an abuse like irregardless.
That's I assume your father might have been behind that.
Indeed, and my mother
and your mom. Talk about good training at a young age. Yeah. Again, I want to remind folks that our guest has been Terry Smith. His book is just incredible. 4 Wars, 5 Presidents. And if you go to the publisher's website, you can use RLFANDF30 to get 30% off. RLFANDF30 to get 30% off. The website is ROWMAN.com. I'm sure that Paula and Julia will share links to the website in the comments, as I know they have already. But please make it a point. It's certainly worth getting. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us, Terry. And we'll see everyone next week.
Great pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you, Neil.
Bye-bye.